Chapter 27. The chairman and the vice-chairman of the Paracon Corporation were, in their several ways, enjoying themselves, as they had discovered when comparing notes after sharing similar delights. Their desires were, so to speak, complementary. On one point they were agreed, of course. The more helpless the victim, the greater the gratification. Tragan, however, with his Naglon faculty of split awareness, found a plenitude of rapture in the intimate experiencing of, and simultaneous distancing from, the sufferings of the victim, whereas Freeth could only be sure of a truly memorable access of satisfaction through the exercise of absolute power, preferably lethal. In the normal way, therefore, the latter might have been expected to revel in the bloody dispatch of an unarmed fugitive. However, to have his pleasure abruptly terminated so soon was to awaken his wrath, which, as Tragan well knew, could be dangerous. "He tried to wing him," said the vice-chairman, in response to Freeth's snarl of rage. "It's standing orders. If a quarry goes into a Gargan area, no one can follow him. Our part of the hunt would be over. All we would have left would be the pleasure of his being eaten alive once the creature returned." Even as he spoke, he felt, and Freeth could see with his ER vision, the body in question stirring. He raised his head, and with sobbing breath started to heave himself towards the Gargan's cave. The hunter raised his gun and lowered it again. Rudley had crossed the boundary of the Gargan's territory. As if in confirmation of Tragan's words, the hunter spoke. "That's it then," he said, and Freeth could feel the rumble of his voice in his chest. "I'm not going in there after him. Come on, let's get back." He turned, and Freeth found himself going down the hill away from Rudley. "Bit of luck, really," the hunter continued. "I promised to take the kids to the big fight tomorrow." Freeth switched to the other channel. By this time, Rudley had managed to make his way across the stony courtyard to reach the Gargan's lair. With a final, agonizing effort, he pulled himself inside and collapsed onto the ground, amongst the scattered bones of the Gargan's prey. The transmissions ceased. He was unconscious. Freeth gently removed his headset. He dug in his pocket for his bag of bullseyes. He put one in his mouth. He licked the sticky mintiness from his fingers. He spoke very quietly. Freeth at his quietest was Freeth at his most dangerous. "Well, congratulations, Tragan," he said. "Your people have proved themselves as efficient as their colleagues. They're supposed to know the terrain. Why didn't they head him off? Just idle curiosity, you understand." Tragan's face had by now darkened to a royal bubbling, but his voice was pale and flat. "I suppose they made the assumption that he would know about the Gargan. After all, any regular follower of the hunts would." "Thank you," said Freeth. "You have made my point." He made to leave, but turned back at the door, like an actor in an ER serial. "Have you ever heard the expression, 'a fish rots from the head downwards'?" he said. "No? Think about it in bed tonight, if you can't sleep." No matter what her mind tried to tell her, Sarah felt as if she were the one who had shot Waldo. But when it became apparent that he was alive, the hope that they could still save him swept away her despair. But to her amazement, nobody moved. Come on, she cried. We've got to go and get him before that thing comes back. We'd just be adding our own deaths to his, said Anya. Surely there must be some way. Sarah turned to appeal to the brigadier, who was deep in thought. We could hunt the Gargan down, he said. Before it gets him, before it returns to his lair if we can. Yes, that's the ticket. Impossible, said Rance. Impossible for us, perhaps, said the doctor. But the Kimonian people are hunters, even such an enormous creature as the Gargan. But Anya interrupted him. No, you don't understand. All life is sacred to the Kimonians, even the life of the beasts they eat. But the Gargan is holy. He stands for the spirit of life and death. You mean they won't kill a Gargan in any circumstances? Said the brigadier. Never. And if you were to do it, it would destroy everything we've built up here. It's their greatest taboo. Sarah was filled with the feeling of helplessness that was so familiar to her as a child. They could argue the whys and wherefores afterwards, for God's sake. It was plain that the grown-ups had no intention of doing anything at all. Lying on one of the side benches was a neat pile of direction finders, like the one Anya had carried. If she were careful, she could sidle over and nick one. You see, when you come into this life, death is inevitable, Anya went on to say. As inevitable as it is when you step into the Gargan's domain, said the doctor. Of course, the Hindus have a similar concept, the god Siva and his consort Kali. But Sarah was content to lose the opportunity of improving her knowledge of the Hindu pantheon. With a jerk of her head to Jeremy, who had been watching her wide-eyed, she walked as casually and as unobtrusively as she could the length of the hut, through the increasingly merry crowd in the club area, and out of the door. "What was it you pinched?" said Jeremy. She held it up to show him. "It's just a matter of putting in the coordinates of the cave," she said, doing it as she spoke. "They were on the ER monitor screen, remember? There, done it," she went on. "Come on." "Stop! Wait for me!" cried Jeremy, as she took off for the eastern hills. But Sarah was as unstoppable as the juggernaut of Bengal. The discussion continued, with very little of consequence being said. The brigadier suggested that Kaido and his people might know some way to entice the Gargan from his den. Ungar had reported that Waldo had stirred briefly before lapsing into unconsciousness again. If the creature could be kept from him, they might be able to call to him to come out, to escape the immediate peril at least. But then what? As Anya pointed out yet again, the Gargan's hunt for its prey was inexorable. Once it had found Rudley's scent, it wouldn't rest until it had made a meal of him. Reluctantly, and with great sadness, Anya and Haben Rance came to the conclusion that this was one rescue attempt which had failed even before it was set in motion. "But what other option is there?" said the brigadier, when he was alone with the doctor. "We can't just leave him there waiting to be killed." But the doctor wasn't any more sanguine about Rudley's chances than the other two. "Our hands are tied, Lethbridge Stewart. Even if we did manage to lure the beast away, the poor boy would still be doomed." The brigadier had never known him to take so negative an attitude at a time of crisis. On the other hand, he thought, the doctor was usually right in his assessment of a situation. It did look as if Captain Rudley was a goner. Unless... Of course! Unless we took him right away from here, he said. "We've got the fly car after all. What's to stop us all getting away? This can't be the only place on the planet where we can hide from Tragan and co." But it seemed that the doctor was determined to be pessimistic. "It had crossed my mind. The snag about that is—" He stopped and looked around. "Where's Sarah?" he said sharply. "And Jeremy?" The brigadier shrugged. He hadn't seen them for some time. "The little fools!" said the doctor. "They've gone to try a great romantic rescue." He set off down the hut. "Let's just pray we're in time to stop them." The brigadier started after him, but immediately turned back. He picked up one of the small stun guns and slipped it into his pocket. No way was he going up there unarmed. The camp was backed by a thick wood. Even after she got through that, Sarah found that the grassy slope leading up into the hills was dotted with clumps of trees, varying from small thickets to quite extensive spinneys. Some of them were quite thick. It was quite a fight to get through them, but she reckoned it was safer to stay as close to the line the direction finder indicated as possible. She had got through the last of them and was more than halfway up the rocky slope to the thinly forested area which topped the eastern hills before she realized that Jeremy wasn't actually with her. Indeed, when she looked round, she saw him coming out of a small copse nearly 100 yards behind. What did he think he was doing? Didn't he realize that the longer they took, the more likely it was that the Gargan would get there first? "Come on!" she shouted. "Can't you go any faster for Pete's sake?" His shout back was interrupted as he tried to get his breath. "You go on ahead. I'll catch you up." "No, you'll only lose your way." He stopped. "I'm sorry. I've got to have a bit of a rest. I'm puffed out." "Oh, Jeremy." She would not cry. She would not cry. She sat down on a handy tussock by a tumbling mountain stream to wait for him. Perhaps it was just as well. She was pretty fagged out herself. The brigadier wasn't much better off. "Are you sure this is the way?" he said, using the query as an excuse to stop for a breather. "Of course I am. We flew over the whole area, didn't we?" The brigadier smiled privately at the irritation in his voice. He was rather pleased to see that the doctor was also making rather heavy weather of the climb. As they emerged from yet another difficult wood, he stopped again and peered upwards. "No sign of them," he said. "Well, they're younger than we are," said the doctor, also stopping, "by several 100 years." "Speak for yourself," said the brigadier, and set off again with all the vigour of a man past his first youth and determined not to show it. When Sarah reached the top, she was almost certain that they had arrived at the very place where Kaido had met them with the bats. It certainly looked the same. Logical, really, she thought, as she caught her breath. They'd been walking along the... what was it? She searched amongst her almost buried package of Girl Guide memories. Yes, that was it. The direction finder had pointed along the reciprocal bearing of the one Anya had followed. That was great. She knew the way from here. Hardly waiting for the puffing Jeremy, she started a desperate scramble down the steep rocks. If only the Gargan hadn't returned. When at last she reached the bottom, for her guess had proved right, she stopped at the edge of the stony clearing and looked and listened. The enormous Gargan construction was off to the right. From this angle, the arch of its entrance could clearly be seen. There was no sound coming from it, or, for that matter, apart from the usual racket, the surrounding forest. There was certainly no hint of the squealing roar of the Gargan after its prey. She held up a shushing finger to Jeremy as he slid down the last few feet with a clatter of falling rock. With a jerk of her head for him to follow, she made for the pile of stones. "Wait a mo!" cried Jeremy in an alarmed squeak. "Anya said that if we crossed the line of rocks, the thingy would eat us up." "We can't worry about that now," she hissed. "Now come on!" Treading with exaggerated care, she led the way to the cave. Pausing at the entrance, she kept herself pressed against the cliff wall and peeped inside. At first, It was difficult to see anything at all. The sun had gone and dusk was near, so the inside of the lair was almost black. Gradually her eyes became accustomed to the lack of light. Thank God, the Gargan wasn't there. But where was Waldo? More confidently, she moved into the darkness, and then she saw him, lying on a pile of white bones and strangely shaped skulls. Even in this light, she could see that those under him were stained a dark red. She ran forward and knelt down by him. She called his name. He didn't move. "I say," said Jeremy, "he hasn't half been bleeding." "Waldo," said Sarah again. "It's Sarah. Wake up, please." But her only answer was the heavy, stertorous breathing of the desperately wounded. If anything, the brigadier found it more difficult to hurry downhill than he had coming up. It was lucky that, thanks to Haben Rance, he was at least more or less dressed for mountain climbing, instead of still being in the uniform he had thought appropriate to his visit to Spaceworld. Only yesterday, was it? Ridiculous. Talk about the relativity of time. The doctor seemed to have got a second wind of some kind. All very well for some. The man had two hearts, hadn't he? His internal grumbling was cut short as the two of them arrived at the base of the steep slope. "There's the creature's cave," said the doctor, indicating it with a nod. "But there's no sign of Sarah and Jeremy. No, there they are." But even as the brigadier looked over and saw the two youngsters, each with one of the wounded man's arms around their shoulders, supporting him, dragging him, he heard what he had been dreading to hear. The bellow of the Gargan as it crashed through the trees towards its lair.